hit a lot of concepts in this. Feel free to ask questions, but we'll kind of be talking about our workflow. Let me get up a couple levels. All right, so right now I'm on my desktop, which is where my actual Django environment is, as well as the place I want to create my project. It doesn't have to be anywhere near the Django environment in the file structure, right? We just activate the environment. So when I do a pip package install, it goes into that environments folder. So everyone should be using virtual environments at this point. How many times do we ever need to run the line virtual env Django env? Once, right? Once. If you want to make a new environment, do it again. But if you do not want to make a new environment, don't ever run that line again. Just activate your existing environment. If you happen to run this line in the same directory as where your environment was, where it is currently, right? I want to create a new one here. It will overwrite that existing environment. So then when I try to use Django, Django's gone. So do this once. After that, we just want to call it, right? Or run source on it, depending on Windows or Mac, right? Source Django env bin activate, and now I can see that my terminal is currently within the virtual environment. My project is not. My terminal is. So when my project refers to a pip package, my terminal knows where to find it. And that's all that it means, right? And what's the first step to creating a Django project? Django admin. And the name of our project, right? So we'll say group. Jeez. I can't type. Group project. I promise it's not usually this bad. So I can see this folder group project created, right? We'll cd into group project. And I can ls and I can see another project folder with the same name as well as my manage pi. So I'm at the right level. Now what's the next step? Make dir apps, right? We want to create that custom folder where we'll be putting our apps. The way Django works, I could honestly just make an app right here, and it would just make an app folder right here. It's a little bit more clean though to make this apps folder and then to link it all properly. Then you have your apps inside of a nice apps folder. After the exam, after everything like that, if you just want to make your apps at this level, that's okay too. It'll work the exact same way. But for the time being, we usually just make this directory apps to keep things a little bit nicer. So we'll cd into apps, and what's the absolute, what do I absolutely need in this folder for everything to work properly? A init, right? Which acts as the glue between this folder and the rest of the Django structure. Most of the other folders that exist already have a dunder init, right? Because they were generated by the start project script. This was generated by me, which means I have to link it myself. So I'm creating the touch init, or creating the init. And I want to start my app from within inside this folder. Start app, my app. Within the apps folder. Why am I doing .. manage pi? Exactly. Manage pi is one level higher than me right now because I'm in the apps folder. What's up, Sargon?
So when you do that though, when you do .. and path, wouldn't it create the app? Shouldn't it create the app, the new folder in a path before it? Like
it will create the folder wherever I currently am. So if I was at the level of manage pi and ran start app, it would be no problem. It would create it right there. Right. But I want to create it within this folder where I currently am. So that's why I stay here in apps, but I'm calling the script a level higher, but it will generate it where I currently am in my file structure.
What would the syntax be if you want to call manage.pi from a path earlier or higher up, and also create a folder higher up?
Let's see. We would do. I think we do .. my app, and I think it'll generate it up there. Let's try it. Nah, it's not going to let us do that. The normal syntax, if you're trying to do something like that, is I would just call it from that location where I see it. I'm basically going to call manage pi from wherever I want this current app to be built. I'm not sure if we can actually call it from another location and make it in a different location. I'll have to test that out and see. But for the time being, if we wanted to make it at that same level as manage pi, I would simply start app here rather than within my apps folder. But for typically you're going to want to make it in the apps folder, or if you don't have the apps folder, just call Python manage pi and start it in that location where you can see manage pi. But I'll have to do some experiments to see because it definitely didn't like this. So we'll see. Well, let's get back into apps. and we will create our app right here. So let's call manage Pi. Let's start our app, and we'll call it my cool app, right? Yeah, it's going to be so awesome. And if we ls, we can see that this folder is now generated in this directory. So what do I need? What other files would I need inside of the app right off the bat? The URLs, and probably a templates folder and a static folder, right? Now it's up to you guys, the rest of your file structure creation. If you want to do it here in the terminal, that's fine. If you'd rather right now open it in your editor of choice, that's fine. Whatever works best for you. I personally like to create a couple of them here. So I'll go into my cool app, and I'll create urls.py. Everything else I usually just generate in the actual IDE, right? So let's get up a level, up another level. I'm in my project folder, and I will open everything inside of Atom. Also, if you don't have the bash profile set to properly allow you to, open your editor like that, the other thing, if you open your editor of choice, whatever it might be, but then file open, I think I've showed everyone by now, but don't open a specific file, right? You can click on a folder and open that folder. That's what you want to do inside of Django because we have so many files. We don't want to leave anything out when I'm working within the structure, right? With Flask, you can kind of get away with it because it was really like 2 files, right? So as long as you had them both open, you were fine. With this, you really don't want to leave anything out. So click on the project folder and simply click open. And, it was already open here. So it obviously didn't open it again. So that way I can see everything. I can see my apps folder generated. I can see the app that I created, the URLs file that I added to it, and I can see my inner project folder. Now, a part of this is going to be talking about my workflow, my setup, right? So the first thing I usually do is hop right into my settings and add my app right off the bat. So apps.mycoolapp, right? And we need to make sure we have a comma. I'm sure you guys have seen that error by now. Basically, it'll just concatenate the beginning of this and the end of your app line. Look like one string, and it'll say, I can't import this. You probably forgot a comma. So we have that bug bounty board, and we can kind of go over some of those bugs here in a moment to try to figure out exactly what bug exists where. And that would be, let's see, no module name app. That was the first thing I wrote on there, right? The concatenation error, because it happens a lot of the time. Variable not defined, we'll talk about indentation errors. Indentation errors, template does not exist. We'll replicate that. Okay, we'll keep those in mind, and we'll try to see if we can replicate some of them. Any questions so far for what I've done?
So just for clarification, so when you're putting like the app name and install that, just apps, whatever the name is?
Yeah, this folder where it lives, and then the app name, exactly. And if there was no folder where it lived, if you just did it here inside of your project, it would simply just be the app name, right? We're creating the path to that app, just with dots instead of slashes.
And then I just have one more quick question about the terminal.
Yeah.
So let's just say hypothetically you set up an environment, but then you exit terminal. Is the environment still gone? Is that
Let's test it out. What do you guys think? It's gone, right? So now if I tried to refer to Django, if I hadn't had it installed on my computer, it wouldn't know what Django I'm talking about, right? So you've got to activate it again. Every time you close it, if you don't see it here, it's deactivated. So you've got to activate it again. Source Django env bin activate, but now we're good to go, right? Now it's activated again.
So you just do the source and not the virtual env.
Only ever run that one time when you're first creating the environment. Remember we did that a moment ago? One time.
I'm just asking because
Yeah, one time. Unless you want to make a whole new virtual environment, and that's okay sometimes. More often than not, for a new Django project, if it's going to be using the same versions as the old Django project, don't make a new environment. There's no need to, right? But if you needed a different version of Django, for instance, or a different version of Flask when you're using Flask, that would be a good argument for a new environment. Django 2 environment. I have one of those, things like that. But yeah, for all of your Django assignments, you're pretty much going to have that one environment that we're using. So cool. So right now I have my app added to my project. I've got a URLs file. Will this run currently? All right, let's try it. Let's test it out. No better way than to test, right? Maybe we should get into the proper folder though, huh? Let's see. What do we call it? Group project, right? And let's try to run our server. Naysayers be damned, right? It works. So if we go to our browser of choice, we can see that we have something rendering, right? It's not anything I've created. It's just going right to the normal index that Django accounts for. But we're going to go ahead and now we can consider that our server itself works. So this doesn't count for me as my normal test, right? This is just this app works right now. But I still have to make sure that this project works. I still want to make sure that my specific app works. So now I'll make the rest of the connections, right? URLs. Honestly, I can just repurpose this line. We're not going to be using admin, right? So we might as well dump it. And then this URL is my project URL. So what am I going to do with this URL here? Include, right? And I'm going to include what? My apps, right? My apps dot whatever my app name was, my cool app, and specifically the URLs file. I'm going to divert all traffic, and again, this is a symbol, this uptick with nothing trailing is the symbol for any string within regex. And I want to make sure that I import include as well so that I can actually include it. You don't need that stuff. I mean, it's good to read to understand. It's just specifying how you can set up URL patterns, but you don't need it. All right, so now I have set up my project URLs to divert all traffic. I'm done with this right now. As long as I'm doing a single app, I'm pretty much done with this URLs file. Now, if you wanted different possible URL routes, to send to different apps and that sort of thing, then you'd keep it open. We're not going to be doing that for most of our work. We're just going to be setting up all traffic to go here. Am I done with settings?
Yeah.
I'm done with settings. There's no reason to have either of those open anymore. They can just be confusing. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to collapse the group project folder. We're basically done with our project settings at this point. In my URLs pie, I can just copy what I had for the other URL and tweak it a little bit. I can just dump the include, and then I can just specify that this is going to go to a specific place. Now this is my app URLs, right? And so where do I want my app URLs? Where do I want this pattern to go? Some index function, right? Whatever I want to call it, but some function that fires when a user just accesses, mywebsite.com or localhost 8000. I want somewhere for them to land. Most websites that exist have that initial root route, right? You don't want people just ending up there and then getting a 404 when they typed in your website, right? You could make a website that does that, but it's not really good for UI, right? Or UX. And what's the last step I need to take here to make this work properly?
From all import.
Now, the comma actually won't break, but you can delete it if you want. Yeah.
From all import.
From here, import views. From this location in the file path, import the views file. So I'm importing the views because I'm going to be communicating with my views, right? This is very similar to what we had. So we've now done the first URLs file. We've now worked at the second URLs file. The second URLs file communicates with what? The views file, right? It communicates with the views file to tell it what's necessary or what we need to do. So I'm importing it so I can refer to functions. Now if I try to run my server right now, what error am I going to get? No index, no module named index. Oh, there we go. Module attribute, module object has no attribute index. I messed up the words a little bit, but it's basically saying, hey, you're trying to call on views.index, which does not exist right now. So let's go ahead and create it. Views.index, and I want both of these tabs open right now. This is my normal workflow. Def undex. Taking in the request, right? Why don't we just print, hey, you got here? And what did I say I like to return just for every app that I establish? I'm not even going to bother with a render. I'm just going to do an HTTP response. Because then I know that this app, I could communicate with it properly. Wow. All right, I can communicate with it properly, and we got to this URL in the specified function. Exactly. I need to import HTTP response, right? Cool. So we want to import that. It's coming from Django shortcuts. We want to import it. When the index function fires, it's just going to say, hey, you got here in my terminal, so I can see if my terminal print statements are working, and it's going to respond with a wow on the page.
Patrick, on our first assignment, what we did was def index request and response equals and on our first assignment, the line where you could print, hey, but we put response equals.
Yeah, you just made a variable to hold on to a string and then just put the, yeah, there's no difference.
Wait, so response equals or print equals is the same thing.
Well, I didn't say print equals, I just said print,
Yeah.
and they're not quite the same thing. Print is going to print where? In my terminal.
Okay.
The response will end up coming up on the HTML page. I want to test two things simultaneously, whether or not I get print statements, because that's going to help me debug, and then also whether or not something will come up on the page. But they were just doing it as an exercise to, hey, put something in a variable, and hey, put that variable in this response. We can put something here.
Gotcha.
Cool? So let's test it out. Let's see if we have any errors right now. No errors, and then we'll talk about this in a minute. With no errors, if I refresh, so we got our HTTP response. So now I validated that my server set up properly, the project set up properly, and it can communicate correctly with my application, right? So now I would say is the best starting point. But if you've already hit bugs at this point, there's no reason to do anything else, right? Let's fix those bugs first, and then we'll start to work on other routes or other templates or other things. Always build with basically build to the point where you know everything's working so that when a new bug happens, you can narrow down where the new bug exists, right? If I haven't validated anything works, then it's a lot harder to narrow down that bug, even with these messages. So cool, so what do we want this to do? Let's say it's an index page that has a form that I can submit to. That first we're just going to see if we can print out the data. Then we're going to see if we can save the data in something like session. Cool? Cool, so... Or do you guys have any cooler ideas? I don't know. What do we want to make?
Do a form with maybe a drop down.
A form with a drop down? Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, let's do that. Perfect, because that's what we're about to do next. So, all right, we'll do that. What do I want to do in order to render an HTML page? I need a templates folder, right? So let's create a folder, templates. And inside my templates folder, I'm going to create a new folder that has the same name as my application. And inside of that folder, I'm going to create my templates file, right? Just an index.html right now. Can everyone see okay? That's right. That's good, right? Okay. So in this HTML file, oops, let's go ahead and set up the greatest form. And with the greatest form, let's set this up. I don't really need a class unless I was going to spend time styling. We'll worry about the action in a moment. We're going to leave method post though. And then what do we want? Some type of drop down. So let's say, let's just go back to the survey. You know, so we'll say we're taking in a name, and input type text. The name, we'll give it a fitting name, making it nice and confusing. And we'll dump the value, right? We're going to specify the value by the data that's inside the actual input. If we put a value attribute, then the value would be this value. But instead, we're reading the value from the input, so we just remove it altogether. So name, and let's put, that's pretty much it. Let's just do that. Then we'll say something like favorite language. And let's do a select. So with our select, what is required inside of the select? Options, right? What actually contains a value? Oh, well, there you go. Now it says it. Darn, stupid autocomplete. I was going to say, what contains the value inside of a select? The text box contains the value of this input, right? The option tag, or the option itself, contains the value for the select input. So we will put values here like, let's say, Python, right? Remove this class, and we'll just call it language. And this is just kind of going back to how it worked inside of Flask, right, when we created that one. So we've got a favorite language. We have a select input that's basically named language. We have one option Python, and let's just do this. And we'll create a couple more of those. Let's say JavaScript and Ruby. So any questions about this form so far with what we have? Pretty standard, right? Nothing too crazy. Let's go ahead and then say we just have an input type submit. So I've seen some people using button and then using a button to submit. That's okay too. The normal standard for using a form is to do an input type submit. You can still style that out the way you would a button. You don't lose anything by doing the input type submit. But this is the standard way with the forms that we'll be using to just do an input type submit.
When would you want to use a button?
I would say it's a better argument to use a button if I was doing some jQuery and doing some like, instead of just relying on this form being submitted through the regular process, doing some jQuery for like validations and things like that. But I could still do, you can pretty much use them interchangeably, but the normal way is to use the input type submit. Name, we don't really need to give this a name. Value, the value in the input type submit's a little different actually. The value is the text that's displayed on the actual button. So let's call it just submit. All right, so let's see, what do I need? So I built my HTML, right? This glorious form, and what do I want to do to actually render it? Right? Let's return a render. And let's dump that. What's the first part of the render? What's the first argument? Request. And the second argument? Great. And that is mycoolapp/index.html. Cool? And it's not mycoolapp here. It's inside of templates already. It knows to look there. And then it's saying mycoolapp index.html. Cool? All right, so let's see if we can get this rendered on the page. Hey, all right. So we have an input. We've got a language. And we can submit. So we didn't specify a form action, so it didn't go anywhere. But specifically this error, CSRF, token missing or incorrect. What does that mean?
That validation thing, you can't hack into it, you didn't have integration.
CSRF helps us make sure that the form submitted goes to the place it's supposed to. It's not coming from an outside source. It's not going to an outside source. It's all within our server. And CSRF is a way that we can authenticate our form data, basically. Which means that every form we submit has to have, at least in Django, a CSRF token. So to create one, we just rely on a little bit of Jinja. CSRF token. I'm sure you guys have hit this one by now. That's an easy error, though. It's kind of nice. Yeah. So CSRF token.
Put that in the form? Every form?
Every
Do
form.
you put that anywhere else?
Nope.
So if you had multiple forms, you'd have to put it in.
Yep.
What was the link that you put on the link?
Link?
Similar to this again. It's on the link tag, in the header.
Oh, that's
Later
a
on.
style sheet. Yeah, so we'll talk about that when I throw some style in here. Because that's a different thing altogether. But Jinja tags are similar, right? There's something else going on there, though. So let's see what happens when I submit my form. Steven. Is it a V or a PH?
V.
It is a V. Okay. And let's submit it. And it didn't go anywhere, right? Because we haven't specified an action. So just like what we did on the board before, now I have a page that's being rendered that has a form. What does a form require? Right? I need a URL and a function to make the form work properly. So I'll just do the standard workflow. And I'm ordering these in a specific way because this is how I do my flow, right? So now I have this form that I'm going to submit to /process. Starting at the beginning of my flow, I'm going to create a URL that is /process. And I'm going to call a function, believe it or not oprocess, that ruined it.
That's views or URL, that file.
What's that?
You're on views right now?
This is the urls.py
Oh,
file.
sorry.
Yep. Views is going to have all of our functions. URL is going to have all of our URLs. So I'm creating a process here, and I'm calling a function that does not currently exist. So my next step is to go to tab
You don't
2.
necessarily need that caret and the dollar sign there, right? Because you want to specifically
Nope, yeah, I could take it off. The caret, though, I need.
just to cover all your bases.
Yeah, cover all my bases. I could leave the dollar sign off, but you'd pretty much want to put it unless you're allowing other things. But more often than not, even if you're allowing other things, you'd still want to put it there. There's certain times you want to leave it open. For these are just absolute URLs.
Just good
So
practice too.
good practice to close it off if you don't need to leave it open. So I specified a new URL with this pattern, and the slash is implied, right? So it's going to go to /process, ending it with a dollar sign, and calling on a function that has yet to be created. So tab 2. Then I'm going to create my function. Def process request. And you guys are going to laugh. I'm not kidding when I say every time all I do is validate that the first step is working. So I'm going to validate that I get post data, that I get specifically the keys I'm looking for in my form, right? I want to make sure the data is there in the first place. There's no point in continuing any further in my mind if I don't have my data. And then return redirect to index. which will obviously go back to URLs, hit the accompanying URL, call the function that gets fired, and then return the page, basically. So let's go ahead and see if I can get my data printed out. Let's not do that, but let's print out Steven again. And language, Steven likes JavaScript now. All right, global name redirect is not defined. What does that mean I need to do?
Import it.
Perfect. So let's import it, right? HTTP response, redirect. Just like we had the 3 that we would regularly use within Flask, we're going to be using those here. We just don't need to pull session in the way we did with Flask, right? So I'm going to pull in render, HTTP response redirect, and I can actually dump this. I'm not really using an HTTP response anymore, so I'm okay.
Patrick, can you go back to the Visual Studio Code? Okay, so my guess is that the reason why you put, under process request, you have request.post, right? My guess is that you put that after you put the index request is because at first you type the link to your HTML file, and then in the next definition you put what is inside in the HTML file. Like I mean request.post, like that's the post method inside the index.html, right?
Yes. Yeah. So when this form gets submitted, it gets submitted via a post request. It's a request like any other request, which means it has to happen via a URL, right? So it's a post request happening to the localhost 8000/process URL, which hits the route, which hits the function, and this is that function, and I have access to the post data here.
Like for redirect, why did you put only slash there?
Because I want to redirect not to this same function, but I want to redirect to another function, right?
Gotcha.
So another URL that calls a different function, the only function that renders it.
All right.
Cool. Any questions about that?
So once this gets submitted, it should show on the terminal, right?
Yes, the data should show on a terminal, and what page will show here?
It's going to redirect.
The same page, right? There should be no change. There's no results page at this point, right? So let's go ahead and set it up. All right, and JavaScript. All right, so we just saw what looked like a refresh, but it's not. I printed out my form data. Notice it's a query dictionary, just like a regular dictionary. I've got my CSRF token. You can say it's a nice little hash string. Then I have the name and the language.
Why does it print U for it?
It's just U as in Unicode, just saying this is a string.
Okay.
Yeah. But you can still just access it via the regular key, and you get the value. It's just specifying, even a number that's coming through on an HTML is still going to be Unicode string, as we saw with the great number game, right? Cool. So I've got form data in my function now, right? I've been able to print out request.post, which means I can do anything I want with this information. So what might be one thing I want to do with this data? Store it, right? I might want to store it in a database, or I might want to store it inside of Session, right? What do I want to do if we're doing the no-no, right, of, actually let's not do that here, but let's just say this is where we would store data in request.post. We would store the request.post, basically. Now, I've seen some people declaring dictionaries that they're just using inside of a function, and you guys keep calling them context. Now, context as a concept is a very different thing than just a dictionary in general. Not every dictionary needs to be called context. We can make it work without it. What context is, and I'm not trying to harp on anyone, but what context is it's a way to describe the data that I'm sending up to the next HTML page to basically be used there. If I'm not sending it up into a next HTML page via a render request, I probably shouldn't have a dictionary called context. Nothing will break. It just doesn't make sense when you look at it. You go, well, why is it called context? You're not using it like context. Just like if I had a word, I wouldn't call it a list, and vice versa. Just, this stuff is not going to make a big difference now because it's all going to work properly, but trust me, you'll get a headache later on when you've declared 100 variables, and when they're all mismatched, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So if I wanted to send some data up to this page, still without anything to do with session, I can just declare a dictionary, right? But if I'm going to be sending it to the HTML, I will call it context, which is just the standard. And I'll say something like name, and I'll just give a value here, just like any other dictionary, right? Steven with a V, right?
Twice now, Patrick.
Twice.
No, I mean, like, you say all my name twice now.
I'm sorry, I just get so excited, Steven, and then I spell it wrong. I don't know what to do, man. All right, so Steven, right? And then what we want to do is we can send it as an argument into the render function, right? So then let's send the context dictionary up there also. Now, how do I basically access? Let's just print it right here at the top. How do I access the values inside of the dictionary that I sent up to the template? Jinja, perfect. So we need Jinja tags. And how do I specify the value? So you said context dot, other people are just saying the key. What's the argument for the key?
Well, if you have multiple dictionaries,
It's only ever one dictionary being sent up,
then there should be
the key. And you said context dot because you're used to using dictionary name dot key name, right?
Yeah.
So what that dictionary actually does, not the dictionary, but what the function actually does is it takes the dictionary past and it basically unwraps it so that it's then just variables that were the keys that have the values that they normally had. But I no longer refer to it as context.name because that won't work. It's not going to put anything. But I can put just name, and I'll get the name printed out. So it takes your dictionary that you sent, which is the only thing we can actually send there. You can't put any other data structure. It has to be the dictionary, and it'll unwrap it. Then I have just variable names that I can use, variable names that were the keys. Cool? All right, so
That's with the word context, is what you're saying? Or
no, the word context doesn't make a difference, but
Okay.
this
I just wanted to
concept,
confirm that,
yeah, this concept is sending up context data. So don't just be randomly calling dictionaries context unless you're sending it up to the HTML page to be rendered. Yeah, just bad practice. So when I'm doing this method, though, creating a dictionary and sending data there, I will call it context. Or,
So you could call that like word.
yeah, I could call it word and word, or banana and banana. It'll still do the same exact thing, right? It's still going to work for me, no problem. But what you're doing is you're using a context dictionary to send context data to the HTML page. So context is sort of the standard fitting name. If you also don't want to declare, the dictionary there, I think we talked about this before, you can just do it right here. It's still a context dictionary. We'd still refer to it as such. But you're just declaring it here instead of putting it in a variable and putting it here. So let's see that work. Look, cool. So now we see Steve in there. Same thing.
Much better.
Thank you. Third time's a charm, right? All right. So let's just leave that there for now. So we can see the concept of being able to create data, not that persists, because this won't persist, right? But data that just gets sent up this one time. Right now it's just getting sent up every time, so it's looking like it's persistent, but in reality it's not. It's the same function sending up the same data over and over and over. But what we could do is, let's see, return redirect. We'll leave that alone for the time being. So let's figure out what we want to do with this data inside of this process function. So someone said we want to store it, right? So let's store it. Where do we want to put it? Session. Cool. Like that, right? Request.session is the dictionary. Just like in Flask, it was just called session. It's acting as a dictionary. So when it's acting as a dictionary, what does that mean I need to use if I want to put something into it? Key, right? So I'm going to specify square brackets and some key. So I'll say something like name. And set it equal to some random thing, right? Oops. All right, immature. So I've got a random thing, and it's always dangerous when I write app. For some reason, I tend to write other words ass. So all right, so when I set something in session, what's that?
The P and S are too far apart.
I don't know how I do it, man. I've done it. Trust me, I don't know. You guys should know by now. The brain in here is just this swirling mass of, it's just chaos. All right, so request.session at name, I'm setting some value into this dictionary, right? If I was to print out request.session, it might look something like this. Right? It's just a dictionary. The only cool thing about session, the only special thing about it is that it's going to persist for me, right? But every way I would work with the normal dictionary is how I'd work with request.session. I know we did SQL Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Everyone forgot Python syntax by today and yesterday, right? It was really, people are doing all sorts of things today. And I know I was giving everyone a hard time, and I hope you all know I'm joking. But working with dictionaries, working with lists, that's going to be our main work next week, right? When we get things back from our database, it's going to be a list of objects or a list of dictionaries or an individual dictionary. Being able to traverse over the key value pairs that exist in a dictionary is what you're going to need to do. Being able to traverse over a list that contains dictionaries and then traverse over the key value pairs in those dictionaries, that's what you're going to need to do. What's up?
No, No, go on.
I was just saying, so if you're having trouble with that sort of thing, revisit something like lists to dict way back in Python in the beginning. Revisit those assignments that helped you traverse over an object. Remember that big exercise we did with all the weird chaining of all these objects? Make some freakish object, dictionary that has a list inside of it with more dictionaries like the Lord of the Rings thing. Make some of those this weekend and test them out. If you're having trouble with that, it won't get any easier. That's the key thing that you need to focus on. So I'm just trying to highlight areas that I think I saw today that we need to work at, which is okay. But if I printed it out right now, right after this assignment, this is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, okay, on line 14, name has double quotation mark. It doesn't matter if it's
Nope.
only single quotation mark.
Yeah, it should be the same back here. Yeah. It'll work exactly the same. So cool. So let's say I wanted to keep track of something. And let's say that instead of just putting a name here, let's say that I'm forgetting the rest of the data right now, but say I wanted to add to this over and over. So a lot of people today, when they were tasked with doing that, they did like a plus equals, right? Which is okay. It's not wrong, but it just makes our lives a lot harder if we actually took that and did the full functionality for session words, right? But say I wanted to have some sort of structure where I could add things into it. I already have session, which allows me to add key value pairs, right? But maybe the thing I want to add is going to be, I want to add multiple of them and keep track of multiple objects at the same key. What's up?
I'm pretty sure that would inject it.
Inject it? Well, I mean, in a sense, but how would we do something like that? Number one, what would be a good data structure candidate to keep track of multiple things? A list, right? So we might want to set up some sort of list. So let's just go ahead and say something like request.session at names, or name list, giving it a fitting name. Let's set it equal to an empty list. Now, do I want to keep this just in the open in this function like this?
Yeah.
Yeah? Let's try it. Let's see what happens. So let's say we have request.session at name list being declared in the index. What's that?
It's going against the grain.
I like it. I like it. Renegade. So we've got this empty list, right? And it's stored, again, is request.session currently equal to a list? No. Request.session is equal to an object or a dictionary that contains a key name list with a value of an empty list. So don't forget what this structure is. Well, if we printed it out, request.session is equal to, I'm just going to throw a double equals, and it would look like this, name list, which is a value of an empty list. What would happen if I had set some values into name list, and then I set a line like this, request.session keys at name list is equal to Steven. What happened to the existing list?
Now it's already.
Now it's Steven, and it's not a list. We don't want to do that, right? We don't just set something equal to something else if we wanted to add to it. We wouldn't just set any list that exists. So my list is equal to this list. As soon as I say my list is equal to 5 or 4, my list is no longer a list. It's now the number 4. And I saw this happening all over the board, all across the board today. Everyone was doing this today. How do we add things into a list in Python? Append. Everyone should be saying append. The same way we push into an array in JavaScript, right? We just push or append. In Python, we just append. MyList.append some value 4, right? Then it took the old list and it put a new value in there at the end of the list. We've been doing this. You've been doing this in JavaScript all the time. So we just want to append to an existing list. Now, in this sense, going off of the same vein, what is my list that lives here? What's it called right now? How do I access my list that exists in session?
Request name list session. Request.session and then brackets name list.
That is the list. So since that is the list, is this valid?
Yes.
It is valid, right? That should work for me. This is just representing a list.
Would that work even if you didn't put something in quotes?
Well, what would we be appending then?
Well, would you be able to append words without specifying that it's a string.
Oh no, I was just putting that as an example of I'm going to append some value, something into here. But yeah, I would want to make it a string.
Okay.
Normally, if it was just a standard dictionary, this syntax would work perfectly, right? I'm just going to be appending into this dictionary. Well, there's one caveat that I think people ran into today, and it's a very specific thing to Django. You can't append to a list that's stored in session. So I'll put out a link, but I kind of want the people that haven't finished session words to still struggle through that part. I know I'm mean, but I think it's beneficial. But this would normally work. This is the syntax, just like when we did that Lord of the Ring exercise, right? I'm just going to get to the specific value I want, and then it's that object, it's that data type, right? At this key, inside of the request.session dictionary exists a list, right? All of this evaluates to just that list, and I'm appending to that list. Cool? Cool. I'm not trying to harp. I just we've got to get back into Python syntax after all those SQL queries, right? What's up?
Are you aware that you didn't type py.manage.py make migration in terminal?
I have not done that yet.
But
Perfect.
you have to do that to activate request session in Visual Studio Code, right?
You have to do that to access request session in any editor. Yeah, just in general in your Django projects. Until we do that, let's try to do it right now. Let's try to see what happens right now. So let's just set this up like David wanted to, because he's a madman over there. Just set it up, and then let's go ahead and say that anytime I go to this process function, it's not going to plus equal random thing, but let's say it's going to plus equal the post information, right? Request.post. And what did we call it on the front end? Name, right? All right, so let's make this, instead of this, let's just do name. Set this back to an empty string. So some fitting data type for what we want to do. We were talking about concatenating initially, right? So I have an empty string, and I'm going to say request.session@name is plus equals the request.post@name. This will still do the same thing David was talking about. I think the reason he brought it up in the first place, right? So let's see what happens as soon as I even try to access. Just refreshing index, I tried to access session, and as Steven said, we have to make our migrations, right? So another bug from yesterday that we're talking about. Where is it? No such table, Django session, right in the middle, operational error. So all of those names, actually Trevor ended up on that board a couple times. So Trevor's the go-to for like 50% of those errors. So you're the guy now. Come on, man. All right. So what do we do to make it work properly for us with session? Right? Python manage py. We make our migrations.
How did you get it to pop up so quick?
Tab, once you start typing, for a file name, so manage py, and make migrations. And once we've made migrations, it's basically like staging your migrations. It's looking for any changes in your models.py, which we haven't touched, which is why it says no changes. Then we Python manage py, and then what?
Migrate.
Right? Migrate. So you can see all this fun stuff happen with some of the authorization parts or authentication parts of Django. But part of this actually says sessions 0001 initial. And that's basically saying, hey, remember how I told you guys that session in Django is stored in a table? This established that table for us, and that's why it now works. You can also see a couple new files generated in our migrations. Actually, not yet. Not until we do our real migrations. So when we actually create a model, we'll see the migration files generated there. I couldn't recall if the session ones were stored there. But let's go ahead and see what happens now. Refresh. We have to start our server again. Python manage py run server. And we've got our form here, right? Eduardo. What's your favorite language, sir? None? There's no none option. See, this is what happens when you have bad users, right? They will still try to break your system.
Bad user experience.
Bad user experience. I'm sorry, this this is true. There's only 3 options. You have to choose. Python's fine. All right, so let's see what happens. All right, so looks like nothing happened, right? We did enter. We did enter Eduardo. What are you talking about? Oh my goodness. All right, so let's try to print out request.session@name just to see what's going on, right? Because the logic right now says what? When my index is set up, I create an empty string. What's that? I was going to say when index routes, when we access the index page, it's going to set request session@name equal to an empty string, and we're going to render the page, right? Then when the process route happens, it's going to call this function that basically adds to whatever was in request.session.name with the newest post data. Let's print it so we can see what's going on, and let's see what happens. Oops. All right, Eduardo. You look skeptical, Steven.
No, just I thought the name disappeared for a second.
Oh, I just don't know how to type. So we got Eduardo. Okay, now let's try Steven. All right, so we got Steven. Why aren't we getting anything added to that string?
It's only getting it every time, right?
It's only getting the name, but my logic looks sound, right? I'm plus equaling that name. What's happening? What's
Every time it renders,
Every session.
every time we redirect, we go back to the URL, that is the index URL, back to this function. And what's the first line of this function? It dumps it, right? It took all my data there and dumped it. And how can we do it? Well, how do we do it in Flask? If not some key in session, right? Name in, and not just session, but basically our dictionary. This is how we can safely check for a key existing in a dictionary. It's the same exact way we did in Flask. The only thing that's changed is the dictionary name. But it's the same exact syntax. If the key name doesn't exist in request.session, set it to be an empty string. If it does exist, what happens? Nothing. It leaves it alone, right?
Is there a difference between if now name not in or if not in?
One of them works. No, one of them's way better. No, they're the same exact thing. Yeah, no. But you should. I like it like this because this is more similar to like doing if not this thing, and that's kind of a normal syntax. But I mean, they should both work exactly the same. But I mean, not equals, not exist, non-existent, that sort of thing. Like if not node, that's why I do the not in front. But let's go ahead and see what happens this time. Let's see if we get a longer name. And actually, you know what? Since this is in session, can I access it on my HTML file?
Yeah.
Do I have to send it up via a context dictionary? No. All right. Let's see. No, yes? You're not allowed to. You said no. Let's see what happens. I access the request.session.name. And let's see if it works. Who thinks it'll work? Print the whole dictionary? Well, request.session.name. Let's see what happens. Nothing right now. Eduardo. Favorite language, Python. I got Eduardo. I did not send it up via a context dictionary. So session's accessible everywhere, but any other variable you declare inside of your function will not exist after that function fires, right? Unless you send that value through a context dictionary. And that happens through the render function, right? Well, let's see. I'm picking on you today.
Anytime.
There we go. Steven. So we can add to a string, no problem, right? Bob, Jeff, Amelia, I can't spell. So we can add, no problem, right? So there's really no difference between doing something like this and doing something with a list, right? Let's change it back to a list. And let's give it a more fitting name. So if name list, not in request.session, go ahead and establish it as a list. We're just making it a different data structure, not a string, but something that's more flexible, right? A list itself. And request.session at name list, we would dot append, right? We're appending to the list, wherever that list might be. Let's print request.session at name list and see what happens. And then let's refer to request.session at name list here. So it won't work, but it might not work in a different way than you guys expect. So Bob, well, actually, it didn't work at all there, huh? It was weird. I was doing the first value earlier, value. But basically, what would we need to do? Think algorithms. What would we need to do if we wanted this functionality to happen properly?
Or
Loop? I don't know if we need a loop. The problem right now is what? We're trying to append to a list that exists within a data structure that won't let us append directly to it, right? I can read that list, right? I can access that list. So what should I do knowing I can access that list? Create a new list. Okay, so what's our new list going to do? If we set a new list equal to the request.session at name list. All right, so what do I do next? How do I do that? Wasn't that the problem in the first place?
Oh,
new list dot append.
Ah. And what am I appending? Request.session?
Your post data.
My post data, right? Specifically what? Okay, and now what do I do?
Get rid of that.
It's like my algo in the morning, huh? Nope, wrong. Get rid of this line. Wrong. I like you guys are learning. I love it. So what equal to the list? Session equals list. Oh, okay. I'm just trolling. Request dot session name list. Perfect. So yes, I cannot append directly to the list that's stored in session, but there's nothing that stops me from pulling it out of session, appending to it, and then putting it back there, right? That's just a weird Django thing. So it'll be different with other frameworks, but Django doesn't like that. It doesn't allow you to do it with how it's stored in a table. Because it technically, even though it's an array, or even though it's a list there, the way it's stored in memory, it's not an accessible list the same way a normal Python list is. So let's go ahead and see if this works. And we were printing out name list every time, right? And the only thing we did in our index is if the name list didn't exist, then we're going to set it to an empty list. So it should exist at this point. All right, so let's see if it works, guys. Test 1. All right. Test 2. All right. So we've got these words being appended, right?
Sorry, can you repeat why we created a new list again?
So the bug was I cannot directly append to a list that's stored in request.session, right? So if what's that?
Right.
I can't do that, but what I can do is I can read the current list there, right? I can get access to the current list. So if I can't append to it, but I can read it and store it somewhere else, I basically make a copy of it locally. I append to that copy, because that's just a normal list, and then set it back to be that copy.
And why can't we append to the list inside of session?
It's because with session, as much as it's a dictionary, it's not a dictionary that's just kind of hanging out all the time. It's a dictionary that's actually, the data is stored in a table, just like in a database. So it's not, as much as it is a list, it's not like a usable Python list that I can just append to the same way, right? Certain things like numbers we can add to no problem. Certain things will work. Strings we can concatenate no problem. But structures like that, it won't just allow me to just directly influence that data structure. So we can just pull it out. We basically make a copy of it in new list. We append to that new list the data that we wanted to append. And then we take the request.session and name list, which was the original list, and just set it equal to the new list. Cool? So a little weird, and that's just a specific Django thing. What's that?
Like you are reading like that way.
I guess, yeah. That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, I get you. Yeah, I mean, you just have to you have to work with it, right? But don't forget, guys, don't forget how creative you are with your algorithms when it comes to doing things like this. There's a way to get it done. It's just a matter of thinking outside the box. I know it can be difficult when you're so, knee deep in the framework and learning that framework, and it can be hard to think creatively about how we want to tackle certain problems. But very soon, starting today, tomorrow, or for your weekend work, but starting today, you're going to have to really start to consider, algorithmically, how can I accomplish what I need to do within this framework? We're going to have challenges like that are present. So so we covered session. We weren't quite ready for the ORM yet, but that's the reading. Anything else that was like a sticky situation that you guys ran into today that you'd want to talk about? Jinja? Okay. So we have this. This is actually perfect. So rather than just append, let's rework this a little bit to make it yeah, what's that? We'll do that.
Like you get the list. So if I want a dictionary inside the session.
You were one step ahead. I was about to do that. So say we want a dictionary inside a session. Just in general, a dictionary inside a session, can I just do something like this?
The same way we can do the dictionary.
Yeah, I can say something like request.session at my, dictionary is equal to some dict, something with some value, right? We can have a name, and we can set it to the request.post at the name. And then let's have a language. Kangaroo language. All right, language, and let's set it to the request.post. I guess I don't like Python. It's Friday. All right, so say we wanted this, right? I can say request.session at myDict is equal to this object, and that's fine. That's this dictionary, right? So then if I printed out request.session, it in and of itself is a dictionary, which would have a key, myDict, and that in and of itself would be another dictionary. There's no problem doing that. Say I wanted a list of dictionaries. Can I do that?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, it's like some people should definitely be saying yes. So we can do that, right? I can say something like, instead of saying request.session, myDict is this, I'll say data dictionary. So data dictionary, just whatever, holding on to the form data, right? Everything that came through. We had the name and we had the language. Let's get rid of this for a second. And instead of name list, let's just call it, results. And let's just call it results. So if not results in request.session, set request.session at results to be an empty list. So this is going to be our structure that's going to hold all of our things. And then for every form submission, we're going to create a data dictionary. And what do you think I'm going to do with that data dictionary?
Make it put it aside. Request session.
It already is a dictionary.
Put in results, put in the list.
I want to put it in this results list. That's the whole idea, right? And how do I have to go about that? The same way, right? I have to get current results from the results list. Once I have current results, what do I do? Append. And what am I appending?
The data dictionary
The-
has the post data in it.
Exactly. It's got all that post data. And then the final step,
You set that
equal it. Equal it.
equal.
Like that? Yeah, perfect. I got the arm and thumbs up approval. Request.session equal it. Equals current results, right? So I grabbed the list out of session, copied it, appended to the copy, and then threw that back into the request.session.
The current result is not the list. How you happen?
What's that?
Current result is not the list.
Don't lie to me. It is a list. What is request.session at results?
Oh, okay.
It is a list. When I pulled it out and copied it, current results is the same copy. Then I append to that copy and then set session at results equal to the copy. So again, because we can't append directly to it. Cool? So let's go ahead and see what we can do now. Let's print out results. I'm not going to do anything with loops just yet, but let's just print out the results and get a couple results. We got nothing. Then let's set up our go-to, Steven, Python. Cool. Looks like a dictionary. Huh? Well, the U's not really there.
Oh,
It's just printing the dictionary. When I access the value, it won't be there. Yeah. And then let's say, what else do we have? We have Veronica and favorite language. Let's just say Ruby. And let's say we have Armin. You guys can fight over who, which one, which Armin? JavaScript, right? So yes, I can print the data out with request.session, but this isn't really that usable to me, right? This kind of makes for not a very nice user experience. So what's the key to printing out things in a nicer way? We said Jinja, right? We kind of wanted to talk about Jinja. So Jinja doesn't only allow me to access values like this with the double Jinja tags, but what else can I do with Jinja? I can create logical structures, right? That's good. You're good. I'm right there with you, man. I can create logical structures. So what's the difference typically between that sort of statement versus this sort of statement?
It's like looking for something in between, right?
In a sense. Mainly, the difference between the doubles versus the single with a percentage is this is going to be just printing values. Variables, things that are stored in dictionaries, things like that. Any just value on a printout. This is the typical syntax for creating a statement. So something like an if statement, an else statement, something like a method that's going to run and automatically get something for us, things like that. So they both work in different ways, so you have to make sure you're using the right tool for the job, right? So we're going to kind of talk about this for a moment and see what we can do to make this look a little bit nicer. Let's create a little div down here. And I want to print out every result, with a little h3 tag, and then next to it a little dash, and then after that dash, the language that person liked, right? So I've got to print out specific things about this. So let's do something like, what are we going to use? What sort of logical structure is fitting? If statement? What's our if statement going to say?
If our value would be value.
You need a loop to run, don't you?
We probably need a loop. I don't think we need an if statement. We probably need a loop. For,
For every
What's the name of your?
we can just say whatever variable name we want. For result, for res, for r, whatever the heck I want. For result in some iterable structure. Now I didn't pass anything through context because this redirects, but I do have an iterable structure stored where? Session, right? And session has the list, right? That's an iterable structure. This for in loop, as we talked about before, is just a way I can very easily, without an index, just address everything that exists inside of the structure, right? It'll work for dictionaries, it'll work for lists. We're using it on a list right now. For result in, and what's our structure called? Request.session.results. I'm sure you guys have picked up on this by now, but notice that with request session, it does not get unwrapped the same way the context dictionary gets unwrapped, right? We could just use the variable names, the keys that were in the context, whereas request session, we still have to specify this dictionary.results because it's coming from somewhere else, right? And what I always like to do is I just end my for immediately, so I don't forget it, because you'll get a nice nasty error if you do forget it. So for result in request.session results, what do you think we should print out next? I wanted to access the name, and I wanted to access the language that each person had basically submitted. So what should I print here? Name? Result dot. None of you are wrong, but honestly, what do you think I'm going to print out? Result. That's it. I'm not going to worry about indexing. I'm not going to worry about subscripting. I'm not going to worry about anything else until I know I can get individual dictionaries printed out. When I know I can do that, then in my mind it's okay to go on to the next step. So result, and let's consider we have name and we have language, right? So let's generate a little h3 and close that. So now we've got them separated. Let's throw an h3 result dot name. Now that I know the data's good, I know the data's there, I can get the names. But print out the first thing first. Don't sit there wasting your time, scratching your head going, how come nothing's being printed out on the screen? If any of this breaks, it doesn't error, it just doesn't show. So you're sitting there poking and prodding and shooting in the dark. Unless if you start with this and don't see anything, figure out what's going on first. Don't just sit there trying to ... chain more things, because it's not, I promise you, it's not then going to work. If it's not working at this stage, you got something else going on. So result.name, and we said we wanted the little dash, and result.language. So for each thing that was in the list, I'm printing out that thing at that position. Result basically just gives me, it's not an index, it just gives me the object to that position. That object.name, that object.language, or that dictionary I should say. So let's add someone. Ed likes Python 2. And now when that for loop just ran again, how many things did it add? Did it just add one? Did it just print one out to the screen? It printed every single one again. The whole page refreshed again. The whole new list was up there accessible again. It had to print out every single one. It didn't just add it. It printed every single one again. And let's say Bob. Cool. What do you guys think? What's up, Sargon?
Syntax question.
Mhm.
Can we use Ginger, the double curly bracket inside of the
Tags?
double bracket?
Inside like this?
Oh no, I mean the other way around. Like inside of the double ones, can we use the statement Ginger?
Percentage ones?
Oh, like a for loop inside of here?
Yeah.
No, it won't work.
Well,
This denotes that we're going to have some Python logic. This denotes like, hey, treat it like a variable. So it's going to access it differently. Yeah, we could try it. Let's try it.
You do an if statement.
Yes. Sorry, let me try to do this real quick and we'll see what happens. Yeah, so it's not going to like it. It just gets weird, and it's trying to understand what that is, because it saw the percentage and it goes, hey, this is going to be some logic, and then as soon as it wasn't logic, it doesn't know how to, basically make that work. It's just getting confused. So you do need the doubles when you're just printing out values, and you need the percentages when you're going to be, doing statements, if statements. So let's just say, let's do an if statement. Let's say if Veronica.
Can we do that? The name, if we did, like, say we wanted, if it ever came through as a name, we change the color.
If the result.name is equal to Veronica,
Yeah, let's say you wanted to have Veronica's name pink or something.
okay, so if the result.name is equal to Veronica, then we can set up a class red. Let's see. Let's do a class and then do a style sheet. This is kind of getting too long, but I'll try to go through this part a little, being explanatory, but a little quick, okay? So I can set up an if statement. If the result.name is equal to Veronica, then I'll generate a class. I'll put
That
inside, wherever the heck I want. As long as it makes sense logically, it'll work. If the result.name is Veronica, it will make this class, and then I do an end if. So let's try to do something like, let's just do a colored text class if the result's name was Veronica. So let's go ahead and inspect to see if the class was properly added. We've got this div, and notice that the Veronica line has the colored text class. So you could do an if like that. You can do an if around whole blocks of HTML. You can put it right there inside around a single attribute. You can do things like that. But let's go ahead and now create a little style sheet. So where do I put my style sheets here? Exactly. So let's create a static folder. And then in my static folder, let's create another folder, my cool app. And inside of my cool app, finally, we have a styles.css. And then in here, let's just say, what do we call it? Colored. Yeah. Did you say pink? All right. So it doesn't work. What did I not do? Didn't link it. All right. So let's link it. Link rel style sheet. Now, how do I link it inside of static?
Does static have to be in quotes?
Let's see.
Static load.
And then my cool app.
My cool app. All right. Is this going to work?
No.
Why not?
You have to load the static.
Oh, okay. I was just going to write something else. Load stat like that? All right. Let's. Are you guys asking or telling? It worked. Woo! But now, so again, load static, which basically tells our server, hey, go fetch the static files. We're going to be talking about them. Then this function, you might ask, why can't I just do an absolute path, right? We can do an absolute path, and it should still work the exact same way. However, when we deploy, what happens is that you do one line that basically grabs all of your static files and dumps them in a central location. So that way, it doesn't make sense for me as a developer to develop in that manner because it would be very confusing. But for the server environment, it makes a lot more sense to have something in a sort of bin that it can just pull from rather than have to traverse a file structure to get files. So when you collect static, it dumps it in a location. Load static says, hey, prep that folder, we're going to be referring to it. And then finally, this generates the real path that will probably be different than our path at that point in time, but it'll generate the real path to that asset. So that's why we do that. So notice it's not the URL for, it's the static, this one. And you can find this in the template section. It'll talk specifically about how we load static for this. We can do it for images. But let's do a change on the CSS real quick.
For the images, it would still be in the head section?
No. You'd still load static up there, but I just mean to say how you'd serve the image. The source would be Jinja tags. Yeah. But it wouldn't have to be in the head. Oh, well, that didn't work. I mean, it did work, which didn't work. See? Okay, someone lied to me. We had this behavior not working earlier. Let's undisable the cache and see what happens. All right, so let's go ahead and set it to green again. Okay, well, I don't know why mine works and someone else's didn't, because I just disabled my cache. What's up, Bruno?
Yeah, I can have that problem. Not exactly like the colors, maybe like the margins and stuff like that, where it wouldn't refresh, you wouldn't change it. The first
I mean, if that's happening, the reason it's happening is the cache is caching your style sheets, but I just undisabled I just enabled the cache again, and it was still fetching a new style sheet for me every time.
So does it have to be on or off the global box?
For me, for now, it didn't do it. I can uncheck this box, and I was still getting the most recent styles. But for other people today, I saw the bug exist on other people's. Better safe than sorry is to disable the cache, open your tools, and then refresh, because it will fetch the newest source.
I had to close my server and open it back up, so I was having an issue with my CSS that I was updating.
Mhm.
It wasn't updating on the site.
Yeah.
So I would update, like Bruno was saying, with margins or like shift my divs around and
Yeah.
it wouldn't change. So
Mm.
the text was still there in the original spot, so I had to
You had to
close
shut
the
it down
server
and turn it off
open
again.
back up and it worked.
Yeah, I mean, if for whatever reason it's not loading the static properly, I mean, typically it's just the caching, but that works too sometimes where you have to shut it down and turn it on again. But we just saw a different behavior here too. So it's a bug that exists, but you can kind of work around it by working with your cache, disabling the cache, refreshing while your tools are open. If worst case scenario you can't get it, then just make sure before you're sure it's not working, make sure it's even loaded in the first place. If it's not even here, then chances are you have a wrong file path or you created something incorrectly with your static reference. But right now, the cache is enabled. Let's do another test. Okay. All right, we got it to go. So for 2 times it didn't go, and then for this time it did go. So that's weird. So yeah, so right now it had cached. As soon as I open this, that's unchecked, but then it still fetched the newest thing. So now I'm very confused. So when in doubt, if your CSS isn't kind disable the cache, refresh while that's open, and it should fetch the newest source. We just saw 2 different behaviors live, so I'm kind of confused. Any other? What's that?
Chrome. That we use.
Chrome. Yeah, I mean, different browsers will do different things too, so you have to be on the lookout for that. So I mean, we talked about a lot of topics right now, kind of that you guys had hacked through yesterday and today on your own, and I'm really impressed by how far everyone got too, just by working through these concepts. I mean, really just did some group activities to kind of introduce these things and work through them together a little bit, but you guys have been able to learn a lot of this stuff. Did this help highlight any of the specific issues that we were having, maybe with Jinja? I mean, Jinja can be kind of a tricky beast, so I would say, just like you're going to be doing some of those lists and dictionary exercises at some point, just make some lists here, put them in a context dictionary and throw them up, to the HTML. Then when they're in the HTML, just try to write some Jinja to iterate over it. But always start with the first thing, You never be afraid to say like, oh, maybe I forgot the first step. Chances are you did. It happens. So start with the first thing, see if that's there. If that's there, then go to the next thing, further, deeper.
If you get rid of Veronica, and just have an empty string, would it apply to all of them?
That color.
Well, would any of the result.names be an empty string?
No.
So then it wouldn't apply to any of them.
Would you be able to do name?
If I just wanted it to apply to everyone, I would just remove the if statement. Right? I just would take out the thing that was blocking it.
Any language select and then this one will be the
Yeah, we could do something. We could say if language is equal to Python, class it out with a Python class or a Ruby class or a this class. And then for each of them, we could have a different, a specific target in our CSS and make it green or red or blue.
So then as long as that Jinja session is stored there, whatever value they put in, color.
Just whatever thing got printed out in this section, just like any other thing that I class out,
Like
Right.
right there, result.name. I mean, whatever's gonna go is gonna go in there. Or whatever they put in is gonna go in there.
Whatever was in the request.session results, when it's printed here, but the thing that it's printed in is an H3 that has a class.
Yeah.
So anything that exists in that list gets printed out, but anything that gets printed out is in an H3 class that is the
So
colored
with the
text.
class in one of the options,
Yeah, we could do that.
they click like blue.
Let's put it on the select. Let's put it just on the form in
What
general.
are you getting at?
I mean, this
You
isn't.
sent me this file.
These aren't even Python. This is CSS questions. These aren't even Python questions. All right. So what the heck am I doing? You got me all tripped up, Armin. All right.
So yeah, if it was a
If it was a checkbox that said make the text big, how would you go?
If it was specifically this part of the assignment, that's the hard part, how would you do it? That's up to you guys. But guys, I'm going to end the video.